Hello everyone, my name is Markéta Hančová and today we'll speak about a Czech composer, Antonin Dvořák. I will take you to a fascinating moment of his life in 1892 when he sails from Europe to this beautiful American land to become the director of the National Conservatory of America. When he was here, he wrote several beautiful pieces, and the most famous, of course, is his Symphony No. 9 from the New World. I would like to introduce you a piece that may not be as famous but is equally intriguing, and it is his Suite for Piano in A Major that he later orchestrated and named it American Suite. I will walk you through this composition and will compare both of them. But let's first put Dvořák into a time space. He was born in 1841 and it makes him contemporary, for example, of Tchaikovsky, Edvard Grieg, Pablo Sarasate, Gilles Massenet, then Rimsky-Korsakov, Modest Mussorgsky, and little older would be, for example, Georges Bizet or Saint-Saëns or Johannes Brahms, who had quite an impact on his life. Dvořák composed in the second half of 1800s, and that's the 1800s were very exciting time for artists because the foundation of modern art was laid. Also, the status of artists changed drastically. Beginning of 1800s, we call the era Romanticism, and then New Romanticism, and then other labels would come. And it was preceded by Classicism and before Baroque time. And at that time, prior Romanticism, the artist status was that of an employee. He was working either on an estate or he worked for the church, and he had to always answer to the wishes of the employer. And he was expected to compose in the fashion of the era. He was expected to follow the rules of the very time when the compositions were composed. Well, that changes in Romanticism because our life in 1800s changed very dramatically thanks to the Industrial Revolution that replaced feudalism with capitalism. With the growth of capitalism, the middle class grows, and with the capitalism also the cities grow. And that had big impact on the status of artists who became now the freelancer. He would live out of commissions from all the theaters and symphonies and the association of music that were in the big cities now. He would be also having commission from the publishing houses. He could publish the work himself. He would always have some benefactors. That was always the case in the realm of art. And big chunk of commissions would come, of course, from the now rich middle class that was eager to embellish its life with art. So the artist did not have to anymore answer to the wishes of the employer, and he could find his own original voice. He could filter life around him through his own soul, through his own eyes, of course, as long as the commissions were accepted. And then there was one new aspect, and it was that some composers liked to let the world know where they come from. And so they would employ something we called nationalism in the music, which means that you would permeate some of your composition with the typical harmonies or the typical melodies of your folk heritage. So it was a very exciting time when Dvořák was composing. And let me now take you very quickly through his life from his birth all the way to the 1892 that we want to explore. As I mentioned, he was born 1841 in a small town called Nelahozeves outside of Prague, and the town is presided by a beautiful, one of my favorite Renaissance chateau that Dvořák's family could see from the window of their inn. They were innkeepers and butchers. Dvořák was the first son. Many siblings will come later, and it was counted on him to continue in the tradition of this family business. Luckily, Dvořák's father was also very good musician. He was a zither player, and when Antonin showed aptitude for music, he was very supportive. Antonin was very lucky because at that time in elementary school, music was taught every day, and the teachers noticed immediately the talent. So later, Dvořák went to study to nearby city where the music education was more robust and where he would learn German. Now, his father didn't want him to learn German only because it's handy to speak languages, but at that time, Bohemia was under the rule of Habsburg dynasty for many centuries from early 1500s to 1918. And so the Czechs were involuntarily submerged into the German culture. German was the only official language, and of course, schools and all institutions, everything was conducted in German. The books were published in German. The theaters, newspapers, everything was in German. So if you wanted to succeed in your life as a Czech, you need to learn German. Well, the other schools, they noticed his great talent, and Dvořák's father was convinced that Dvořák must go to Prague to study music. He's 16. His father piled up two-wheel cart with everything Dvořák may need in Prague, and off they went on a journey on foot, 26 miles all the way to Prague, where he attended the organ music school. It was economical reason he did not opt for conservatory because that was 6 years long, and at conservatory when you studied instrument you would not be given any composition classes, where in the organ school he could also study composition. He graduated with flying colors. He's 18 years old and he's eager to start composing, and he's launching on a decade when he's very, very poor. He needs to make his end meets, but by 3 jobs. He was music teacher, he was organist, and he also played in various bands. And that was his favorite part, and the nucleus of his last band when he played became the band became the nucleus of the newly opened provisional theater that would play some Czech repertoire. The Habsburg dynasty felt the pressure from all the nations that the dynasty would rule, and they realized in the second half of 1800 they need to be a little bit more benevolent, otherwise they are calling for a big trouble from the empire. So Dvořák, as a big patriot, he was so happy he can be part of it, and he would meet famous people like Glinka came, the father of Russian music. Then Richard Wagner came. He was bitten by the passion for Wagnerian music, and he would follow Wagner everywhere he would go. He would ask 1,000 questions. And then in 1866, Bedřich Smetana, Dvořák's big role model and the father of Czech music, became the musical director, and it was very inspiring time for everyone. Smetana brought very wide repertoire, and Dvořák said, "This was my conservatory." He stayed in the theater as a violist for 9 years. He studied every single score, so he would learn about composition, and he got to know lots of beautiful compositions, of course. His breakthrough came in the 70s. He's getting married in 1872, and he actually married a sister of his big love. He fell in love passionately in 1865, and he lost his head for his pupil, Josefina Čermáková, but she would have nothing to do with Dvořák. So 7 years later, he married her sister, but the marriage was very happy, just like Mozart, who married a sister of his big love, and also his marriage was very, very happy. So Dvořák is very happily married. He has a sad time when their firstborn child died, but in 1875, his big breakthrough, when he finds out that in Vienna there is Austrian stipend for impoverished composers. And he decides to submit. You were supposed to submit about 3 short works, but Dvořák would take no chance. He submitted 15 pieces, and not your short sonatinas, but he submitted 2 symphonies, cantata, overtures, string quartet, string quintet, you name it. And when the jury would come to his name, they see the pile of the compositions, they say, who is this guy? But when they started reading the compositions, they fell in love with the beauty of the music of this guy, unknown guy, and who presided the jury was nobody else but Johannes Brahms. And he absolutely fell in love with the music of Dvořák, with its spontaneity, with the inventiveness of melody and harmony. And Dvořák won the stipend. It lifted big burden off his shoulders because the stipend, of course, came with big chunk of money. And by the way, he then will win it 2 more times in the future. And Brahms offered to Dvořák to use his own publisher, Fritz Simrák. And that was a big win of Ládery for Dvořák because Simrák started publishing his work, he started commissioning his work, and life became much, much easier for him. Now, there was not only sunshine, of course, in Dvořák's life, but also cloud came over the house of Dvořáks because in 1877 they had a terrible tragedy in their household. Their daughter Růženka, who was over 1 year old, she was poisoned by phosphorus. It was kept in house. It was an accident. It was kept to make matches. And before they could recover from the shock, losing Růženka, 4 weeks later, their son Otakar, who was over 3 years old, died from smallpox. I cannot imagine the depths of the sorrow of Antonin and Anna, and he mirrored that sorrow in his beautiful religious work called Stabat Mater. It premiered in Prague in 1880, and then in 1883 it premiered in London, and it was smashing hit. Dvořák literally became the household name in England, and it became the first of 9 visits to London, and the commissions were coming left and right, and he was so much admired there, and he was treated with such a reverence there, and he was already played around Europe, but with the big success in London, all of a sudden he was played everywhere in Europe and also in America. Not only Theodore Thomas introduced him in the New York Philharmonic, but he was played all over America. And ever since that time, he was financially quite well off, and he could concentrate only on the beauty of the composing. And we are approaching the time when that we want to explore. He's offered to be teacher at Prague Conservatory, then he was offered to be head of the conservatory, and up to time that we want to talk about, 1892, he wrote about 350 pieces. He finished already 8 symphonies, many operas, chamber work, many songs, and here comes a letter from a lady called Jeannette Thurber. She is offering him to direct her National Conservatory of America. Well, who is Jeannette Thurber? She is of Danish descent. She is trained in Paris Conservatoire, musician herself. She married very well. She is millionaire living in New York City, and she is philanthropist in the field of music. In 1883, she sponsored something that was not common in America, and that was series of concerts for young people. Then a year later, she sponsored Wagnerian Festival. Then a couple of years after that, she would debut Boston Symphony to play in New York City. At that time, the symphonies were not yet traveling as they do today. But the most important thing was 1885, when she established American Opera Company, that then she changed into the National Conservatory of America. She wanted all the talent that is in America to stay in America and study the music in America rather than being forced to go to Europe. Thurber's institution was not the very first one. We have already music school in Boston, and in 1863 the today famous Oberlin Conservatory was established, but it was not enough. And the National Conservatory of America that Jeannette Thurber established had very interesting mission. She had incredible vision and mission and goals. It was twofold. Number one, she had a jury, and if you proved to the jury you have talent, you would be admitted regardless of your background. African American, Native Indians, disabled people, women, whoever it is. And if you didn't have money, that's okay. We'll have stipends. And then the other aspect of the conservatory was that she wanted the teachers to teach the students national American classical music. That is why she set her eyes on Dvořák, because she felt that he permeates lots of his composition with the folk heritage of the Czechs and Slavs in general. And she said, you recognize the piece is ethnic or has some ethnicity, yet you don't have to be Czech to understand it and embrace it. So she wanted Dvořák to find what would be the core of the American classical music, how we can define the national music of America. And then there was one more aspect, fascinating. She had absolutely incredible curriculum. You know, at that time, when you studied voice, you studied only voice. If you studied instrument, you studied only instrument. Her curriculum was very well rounded. Whatever you studied, you had these general education classes in music, the appreciation of music, the development of music, development of opera. You were taught also sight reading. No matter what you studied, you were taught singing. And so when you finished the conservatory, then you were truly well-rounded musician. And actually, the famous Walter Damrosch, who established in the very beginning of 1900s the Institute of Music, was inspired by the curriculum of Thurber and took it, and then his institution merged in 1924 with Juilliard, and so her curriculum was transformed into was given to the Juilliard and is live till today. So she was a great visionary. I have amazing respect for her. She lived a very long life. She was 96 when she died, and she was very strong and amazing lady. So back to Dvořák. So she's bombarding him with letters and telegrams, you should come, and Dvořák is not sure if he should come. He has 6 children by this time. He thought it would be too difficult. He also has a little bit of neurosis. He's agoraphobic. He doesn't like to go alone outside, and so he's not sure. But there are a couple decisive moments. Of course, as any artist, he was seeking inspiration. But there was also the economical moment, because he realized that he will be paid 25 times more than he's paid in Bohemia. And then he was kind of ready for the change of scenery. And it was because his publisher, Fritz Simrak, started telling him, you should Germanize your name. You should not write Antonin Dvořák, you should write Anton Dvořák. Dvořák said, I'm not changing my name is Antonin. And Simrak was, persistent, no, you should change your name, it would look better. Dvořák, of course, was very offended by that. And then Simrak said, you know what, so keep your name, but you need to always name your work in German, so people know you are worldly, you are one of us. And Dvořák said, I'm not going to do that. And so he was quite taken aback. I mean, not taken aback. He was used to it that, the Bohemians were treated by the Viennese a little bit as second-grade citizens. But then he found out that the Viennese Philharmonics, who was producing his work the year after, when the Viennese Philharmonics would produce another program of his, the members of the Philharmonics said that they are not going to play 2 years in a row music by some Slav from Bohemia. So, of course, Dvořák was hurt by it, and all this together probably contributed to the fact that he decided And off they go, Antonin Dvořák and 2 kids. The other 4 kids will come later, and he is going on the ocean liner SS Saleh, and he's coming to the pier Hoboken in New Jersey. And here is the secretary of the conservatory and 300 Czechs who are screaming in Czech and singing national songs, that all works of Thurber, and there is swarm of journalists. At that time, New York City has about 500,000 people, and they have 43 newspapers. They have New York Times, and they have half of the newspaper would belong to Joseph Pulitzer, and half would be owned by Hearst. And there is lots of rivalry, and people are competing, the journalists in competing, who will bring more sensationalist article about Dvořák, about whom they wrote before he came. He feels very much welcomed, and then in about a week there is a big banquet to his honor. He opens the door, and there is 3,600 Czechs. I really don't know how Jeannette Thurber pulled this off, but that was the reality, and Dvořák's family was just so happy and felt as if at home. And then in October he would conduct a big gala that was for the 400th anniversary of Columbus coming to America. And he composed for that a beautiful piece, Te Deum, and then he would conduct pieces of other composers, and everyone who was important in New York City would come to see Dvořák, and Dvořák truly felt so much embraced. And then, of course, came the work. He would teach, and actually one of his pupils was Harry Burleigh. He was African American, and he had big impact, big inspiration for Dvořák. He would sing him thousands of the spirituals and thousands of songs that he learned from his blind mother. And then Dvořák was exposed to the Indian music. He saw first a big show of Kickapoo Indians, and he absolutely fell in love with it, because he always loved Indians for romantic reasons, but also of course for the culture and history. He read back in Bohemia Longfellow the Song of Hiawatha that was translated in Czech, and he was very much interested in that subject. And then when asked what would be the national American music, he said it one of the hundreds of interviews he gave in America, that he believes that the core of the American classical music should come from the native melodies, which would be the Negro spirituals, as he says, and the beauty of music and dances of the native Indians. As you can imagine, many people embraced it, many people were against it. But when we think about it, the cakewalk music, the predecessor of ragtime, the ragtime and jazz and all kind of subcategories of jazz, all comes from that very heritage. And then he added about 2 years later in 1895 that also the core of the American classical music would be, of course, everything what the immigrants bring to this country. So Dvořák is teaching, he's conducting some concerts, and he is reaping huge success with his Symphony No. 9. He wrote it in the summer vacation that he took in a Czech hamlet called Spillville in Iowa, and the premiere is in December of 1893. And the work I want to talk about, the suite in A major, was written within 3 to 4 weeks in February to March of 1894. What is it? It's called suite. And what is suite? Suite in the historical terms started in Baroque, and it used to be a collection of dances that were bound by one key. They had the same key. Then in 1800, suite became all kinds of different things. For example, suite would be if you take from ballet that you wrote, if you take the main melodies and you nicely organize it in 20 minutes, let's say 20 minutes artwork, then it can be self-sustaining, and it could be offered as a concert piece. But suite in general would be a string of certain pictures, for example. And in our case, I think that the suite, Dvořák suite, is a string of his inner world pictures about this beautiful country. It reflects the beauty of the spirituals, it reflects the beauty of the Indian music, and it also reflects his yearning to go back home because, of course, he was homesick. So the suite in A major was written only for piano. It has 5 movements, and the first movement starts with a beautiful romantic slow melody that uses a pentatonic scale, which is scale of full steps within the octave, only 5 tones, and it gives us the sense of its unsettling feeling, and also that is the building block of the spiritual. So perhaps he is giving us the his view of the open prairies, it giving us the view of what music he hear in this beautiful country that he admired so much. And then you will hear a little bit faster part of the very first motif, and then you have the second motif, and that is vivacious, whimsical, playful, and in the orchestrated version you hear percussions as if imitating the tam-tams, and perhaps that motif comes from the Indian dance. And then we go to the second movement, and the second movement in sonata form. So again, you have 2 different motifs, and it's very vivacious. It will not let you sit still. And then he is taking us to the third movement, where he is telling us where he is from. It's called Ala Polaka, meaning not that he's from Poland, but that's a term that we will work with the dance Polonaise. But I think that he chose a very similar dance, Czech dance Sousedska, and it's written in rondo. So it means it will be melody A, different melody, melody A, different melody, melody A, and it's a very elegant, beautiful movement. The movement number 4 is the core of the work. It's truly, truly very beautiful and very refreshing, innovating in the harmony. What he does is that he starts in A minor, and then he goes 4 half steps up, which is a small third, and he ends in C major. If you play in piano, you can try it. You would play A minor chord, E, C, E, and then you will arrive to C major, and you can play G, C, E, the inverted C major. And then he does the same thing, except he goes to C minor, and 4 half steps would land you on E flat. And it just sounds so pleasant and so fresh and so beautiful. So this 4th movement, Andante's slower one, is theme and variation, which means he's establishing the theme and he is playing with the theme within this beautiful movement. And the last movement again is very contrasting to the previous one, very bold, very vivacious, and he is reflecting the melody from the very first movement. He's repeating in the last movement just to have a nice closure of this beautiful picture of the inner world of Dvořák in America with the Bohemian heritage. So you will listen to the piano, and then you would say, okay, let me see what he did with the orchestration. When you hear the orchestration, of course, the texture is different, of course, because we have many instruments, but something very interesting happens, because when you will hear the orchestration, I don't think that any of you would say, oh, forget the piano, this is so much lusher and better. Actually, Dvořák exploits the possibility of the piano absolutely in amazing way, because the piano, not that it can substitute orchestra, but in this case the piano piece is as appealing and as rich as the orchestration, and that's something very unique in my opinion, and I think that you will really have fun to compare those 2 pieces and also to walk with Dvořák and recognize the emotions he had. He loved this country, and you can really hear it in it. He loved the landscape, he loved the busy streets. He was in Chicago, and when he lived in New York City, he lived in Lower Manhattan, and he loved American people. In his letters, he said that American people are so welcoming and so kind and so tolerant and so interested in him. So I think that this piece truly reflects everything, his heritage and his wonderful experience he had in this country. So after this, Dvořák decides to leave a conservatory after 2.5 years. He comes back home. He mostly spends time in his beautiful summer house at Vysoká, which is a very nice museum. If you ever go to Czech Republic, he writes mostly opera, and he dies quite young. He's 63. He died in 1904. So, ladies and gentlemen, I hope you learned something new about Dvořák. I certainly hope you will enjoy his music. I will be looking forward to seeing you at my next episode. And now, ladies and gentlemen, let's together enjoy the beautiful music of the Czech composer Antonin Dvořák. Enjoy.